Hello everyone, this is Air and welcome to the 37th episode of Death Row Executions. Today's story is on Wanda Jean Allen, who was sentenced to death by method of lethal injection for homicide in the state of Oklahoma.
Okay, go ahead. First, I want to thank God and ask for forgiveness once again. And I want to apologize to my mother. And I've asked her for forgiveness as well. All I've taken her through. She's been an excellent mother in more ways than one. But most of all, I want to apologize to Miss Williams and to Gloria's family. I'm sorry, and I'm ashamed for what happened. I love you today, too.
Wanda Jean Allen was born on August 17, 1959 in Oklahoma. She was the second eldest of 8 children and grew up in various unstable environments. Wanda grew up with both parents, but her father left the family after the 8th child was born. The family then moved into public housing, and her mother, Mary Allen, became an alcoholic. The neighborhood they lived in was rough, and majority of her family members lived in poverty, had some sort of medical condition or learning disability. Her and her older brother also started stealing at a very young age in order to help feed the family. One day in 1971, at the age of 12, Wanda went to the store with her brother, Bill Allen. After getting groceries, the two began walking back home when they decided to jaywalk. Bill started to run across the street, and he thought Wanda was running with him. When he turned around, that is when he noticed her still in the middle of the street and seconds later getting struck by a truck. He said that her body flew in the air, and when she landed directly on her head. Things went downhill for Wanda emotionally and cognitively, and this is when she began to overreact with anger in certain situations. She was also not living in the best of areas and was getting into a lot of trouble. She was surrounded by guns, drugs, pimps, prostitutes, and violence. One day, while running in the streets, she was stabbed in the left temple, which left her with permanent brain damage. After this incident, Wanda, now 15 or 16 years old, spent time in a juvenile detention center, and this is when she was evaluated by psychologist Dr. Martin Krimsky for the first time. She was given an IQ test and received a 69. The psychologist said that her left hemisphere was dysfunctional, which caused her to have difficulties with comprehension and affected her ability to understand cause and effect. It was also noted that she was the type of person who would lose control when under stress and that she had difficulty thinking and making plans on her own. It was recommended that Wanda be put into protective custody, but nothing was done to follow up on Dr. Martin's request and recommendations. Wanda was able to graduate middle school, but by 9th grade, after receiving her first report card, she had F's in all of her classes except for her English class. In a later interview, she said that the only reason why she received a good grade in that class was because the teacher cared about her, worked with her, and it made her try as hard as she could. Despite the support from that one teacher, Wanda was not able to handle school and ended up dropping out at the age of 17, having not gone past the 9th grade. Another thing that was different than the norm for Wanda was her sexuality. She was a black lesbian in a family that held strong Christian values, with one of her brothers actually becoming a reverend later on in life. Despite how others felt, she was still open with her sexuality and was accepted by one of her childhood friends, Deidre Pettis. Eventually, Wanda and Deidre began a sexual relationship and ended up moving into their own apartment together. It is not clear whether or not Deidre was open with her relationship with Wanda because at the same time she had a boyfriend who was also a pimp. It was later suggested that Deidre was prostituting and her boyfriend was her pimp. One day on June 29, 1981, at the age of 21, Wanda was at a motel with Deidre when her boyfriend came and they all began to argue. Wanda said that Deidre's boyfriend began shooting, so she returned fire and accidentally shot Deidre. The evidence conflicted with Wanda's recollection of the crime because the autopsy showed that Deidre was pistol whipped and shot in the abdomen in close range. Despite the conflicting statements and evidence, during trial, Wanda struck a deal to plead guilty of manslaughter. She was sentenced to spend 4 years in prison and only served 2. While in prison, she met a woman by the name of Gloria Leathers, who was serving time for manslaughter as well. Gloria remained in prison when Wanda was released, but they both kept in contact. When it was close to Gloria's release date, she asked Wanda if she could move in with her, and Wanda agreed. The two lived together and had an on-and-off romantic relationship for roughly 3 years. In those 3 years, the local Oklahoma City Village Police Department had been called multiple times by both Wanda and Gloria when it came to their disputes. Wanda would frequently threaten Gloria if she ever left the relationship, so every time Gloria broke up with Wanda, she would eventually come back. During their relationship, Wanda gave Gloria a couple of letters. The first letter had an innocent cover of a girl praying, but on the inside it read, "You're not only in my prayers, you're also in most of my confessions. You're everything I ever wanted. I'm very happy with your love. You're my everything. P.S. I'm the type of person who will hunt someone down I love and kill them. Do I make myself clear, Gloria?" Here is a picture of another card she gave Gloria. Inside the card it read, "Try and leave. You'll understand this card more." On December 2nd, 1988, the two went to the store together and got into an argument. Gloria decided to break up with Wanda that day, which caused Wanda to become irate. Gloria called her mother to meet her at the apartment they shared so she could help get her things to move out, and she also called the police. A police officer followed them home and remained close to Gloria as she was packing her belongings. When Gloria finished getting her things, she and her mother drove to the village police department so she could file a complaint against Wanda. The police officer who was at their home left, and that is when Wanda got into her brown Lincoln and drove to the same police department. When Wanda arrived, Gloria got out of the car and walked closer to Wanda while her mother Ruby Wilson stayed in the passenger seat. Ruby said that she heard her daughter yell, "No, Jean, no, I'm not coming back," and turned her back to Wanda. She leaned into her car through the open driver's side window, and Wanda followed behind her, hiding her hand underneath her sweatshirt. When she was close enough, she pulled out a .38 caliber handgun, stuck it into Gloria's abdomen, shot, and casually walked away. Ruby Wilson heard something but did not believe Gloria when she cried out that Wanda shot her until Gloria turned around to show her the gunshot wound. The bullet entered her abdomen and exited through her back. Ruby had to see her daughter's insides hanging out of her body and wasn't able to do anything as Gloria collapsed on the floor. Everyone inside the police station heard the shots but did not witness the actual crime. One police officer noticed that Wanda fled the scene with a gun and got into her brown vehicle. They waited for the fire department and paramedics to come to take Gloria to the hospital, where she later was able to verify that it was Wanda who shot her. When police tried to go back to their apartment, they found the gun that was used for the shooting, but Wanda was nowhere to be found. Unfortunately, Gloria died a couple of days later due to gangrene on her intestines, and Wanda still had not been arrested. It wasn't until December 6, 1988, police were able to apprehend Wanda in Duncan, Oklahoma, because one of her family members called the Crime Stoppers hotline in order to get reward money for disclosing her location.
Yeah, Wanda, before we get started, I want to tell you that we just received a call from Mercy Hospital and Gloria's passed away. She died about 20 minutes ago.
Be for real.
I'm for real.
She was irate.
While in custody, Wanda broke down when she found out that Gloria died, but said that she acted in self-defense because Wanda hit her in the face with a rake when they were at the apartment. When she was photographed before being taken into jail, she did have a mark on her face, but her story was not corroborated by the police officer at the scene nor Gloria's mother. Wanda's family hired a lawyer by the name of Bob Carpenter who agreed to take on her case. He said he would represent Wanda for a total fee of $5,000. The family scraped up enough money, but were only able to give him $800. Bob was unaware of Wanda's previous conviction back in 1981, so he was shocked to learn that the state was charging Wanda of first-degree premeditated murder and seeking the death penalty. He asked the judge to be removed from the case because he had never worked on a death penalty case before, but the judge refused. He then asked for help in getting a public defender because he was not given enough money by Wanda's family and did not have the proper resources to hire investigators and do what he needed to do in order to properly represent Wanda. The judge refused, so by Bob's own admission, he did not try his best, and a lot of things were misrepresented or never mentioned during trial. Although the state knew of Wanda's IQ and medical history, it was not presented in court. The prosecutors also asked Wanda if she graduated high school, and Wanda responded by saying yes, so they focused on the fact that Wanda was an intelligent woman who graduated high school and completed 2 years of college. It wasn't until after trial and during a clemency hearing when the Assistant Attorney General by the name of Sandra Howard brought up the fact that the state was not executing a mentally retarded person and reminded them that she had graduated. The volunteers helping Wanda for her clemency hearing said that Wanda had a difficult time understanding or remembering the difference between junior high school and high school. She also made a statement to them that she graduated 9th grade, so the information initially given was false. During trial, Bob Carpenter tried to bring in evidence saying that Gloria Leathers was a violent woman who was also convicted of stabbing a woman to death. The judge agreed with the objection from prosecutors, saying that the information was hearsay, so he was not allowed to talk about that anymore. Ultimately, the jury was made to believe that Wanda was the more masculine one in the relationship and was abusive and aggressive with having a previous felony on her record. They found her guilty of first-degree murder, and she was sentenced to death by method of lethal injection. After being sentenced, Wanda was sent to the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, Oklahoma. While in prison, she had many people saying that she was a changed woman who found God and had given up being a lesbian. A reverend by the name of Robin Myers, who was also there supporting her, made this statement: "I always suspected that Wanda's renunciation of lesbianism had more to do with helping to revamp herself in the most palatable way with her clemency and appeal processes. She knew perfectly well that her being a lesbian was a big strike against her and that it's an embarrassment in the Black community. She was going to play the best hand she could play at the very end." When it came to Wanda's clemency hearing, David and Stephen Presson volunteered to be Wanda's legal advisors. They were able to bring in Bob Carpenter, and they focused on the fact that she did not have a fair trial because of how bad Bob did in representing her. They also brought in the psychologist who initially met with Wanda when she was a teenager, who spoke of the effects of frontal lobe damage. Lastly, they wanted to make it known that Wanda was mentally retarded and should not be executed. In a vote of 3-1, Wanda's clemency hearing was denied, and Governor Keating refused to grant Wanda a final stay of execution. For Wanda's last meal, she had a bag of chips. When she was strapped in for her execution, she was asked if she had any last words, and she said, "Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. That's it. Thank you." She smiled and then looked at the witness area, stuck out her tongue in a playful way, and did a little dance on the bed she was laying on. The smile faded as her eyes glazed and rolled in the back of her head, and she was pronounced dead at 9:21 p.m. on January 11th, 2001. Wanda Jean Allen was the first female to be executed in the state of Oklahoma in almost 100 years and the first Black woman to be executed since the death penalty was reinstated in the United States. And now for discussion and question time. Here are some pictures of Wanda's clemency hearing. This board member dozed off and yawned throughout everyone's speeches. Do you think the board has their mind made up before even listening to any plea for clemency? Immediately after the votes were taken, 2 of the board members were laughing with each other, and it did not seem serious at all for them. In spite of her IQ, I find that she was intelligent enough to comprehend what she wrote in that gorilla card. She said, "If you leave me, you will understand this card more." Do you guys agree that if she can comprehend cause and effect, unlike the psychologist who said she couldn't, she would also understand that if she kills, there would be a consequence? And if she can't think in the moments when she gets angry, then why are people like this able to roam free while innocent people might not know they are right next to an explosive killer? I have done a few stories where the person I feature has killed and only spent a few years in prison. These same people come out of prison and kill for a second time after being released. Do you think that these type of people should be given the opportunity for early release for good behavior in prison? I feel that it's obvious people will fake being nice and manipulate others to believe they've changed, but whatever makes them tick will still be there. Their twisted fantasies and obsessions will still be there despite how nice they appear. They have tricked majority of everyone who was around them when they were free, so I believe it's only a matter of time before they commit the same crime, and 2 years in prison is not enough, in my opinion. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Emilia Carr was born on August 4th, 1984. She grew up with her mother, Maria Zayas, who said that Emilia had everything growing up. In school, she always maintained A's and B's and had even enrolled in the Army ROTC program at her high school. Although seemingly doing well in school and having an IQ of 125, she dropped out but did go on to get a GED. After getting her GED, she dabbled in modeling, photography, and had even gone to a massage therapy school for a while. Emilia was young, but had been in 2 marriages that ended in divorce. She ended up filing a restraining order against her first husband and was also spiraling out of control with an ex-husband who was a thief and was into stealing exotic birds. Emilia got caught up and was able to avoid prison time, but did get sentenced to 2 years of probation. She was now a young mom of 3 children, but her ex-boyfriend by the name of J.V. Acomb was taking care of the 1 child they had together, and her relatives were taking care of the other 2. After her failed marriages, she started a relationship with a man by the name of Joshua Damian Fulgham, who was a father of 2 with his on and off again girlfriend, Heather Strong. Emilia fell in love with Joshua and the 2 got engaged in November of 2008, but the following month in December, Joshua married the mother of his children, Heather Strong. Although feeling betrayed, Emilia surprisingly kept in contact with them, and they seemed to get along fine at first, with Emilia even agreeing to babysit Heather and Joshua's 2 children. Heather and Joshua's new marriage was not healthy, and Joshua ended up going to jail a month after they married in January of 2009. He was soon released, and the charges were dropped against him only because Emilia forced Heather to drop them. Heather was done with Joshua, left him for good, and started seeing someone else. They filed for divorce soon after, but disputed over child support and child custody. Emilia and Joshua had no issues getting back together, and in fact, Emilia was elated because she was estimated to have been around 6 months pregnant with Joshua's child. She had Joshua's back and would do anything to support him, even if that meant helping with having Heather killed to avoid him being in a legal battle over their 2 children. It was now February 2009. Heather was working at a restaurant in a petrol gas station, and for some reason she left work and was convinced or lured into a storage trailer behind Emilia's mother's house. Heather eventually died at the hands of Emilia and Joshua. Heather failed to show up to work, check in with her children, and other people, so she was reported missing on February 15, 2009. She was eventually found buried in a shallow grave on March 19, 2009. Joshua was arrested for fraud soon after Heather was reported missing because he had taken all of Heather's credit cards and was using them. He did not mention Emilia's name initially, but she too was eventually arrested because investigators were keeping an eye out on people who were close to Joshua. Investigators were able to listen to a recorded call of Emilia discussing the crime with Joshua's sister, and Joshua also ended up confessing. Emilia was arrested on March 24, 2009, and it has been reported that while being questioned, she had spoken with investigators on 10 separate occasions and had admitted to the crime without asking for legal representation each time. Although she recanted her admissions at a later date, they still held in court. While in custody, Emilia gave birth to her 4th child, and the child was given up for adoption. In a vote of 7-5, Emilia was found guilty on December 7, 2010, after her 2-week-long trial, and she was sentenced to death by method of lethal injection. As for Joshua, he was sentenced in 2012 to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Emilia was once the youngest woman on Florida's death row. She tried appealing her case, saying she had an ineffective counsel, but in 2015, the Florida Supreme Court agreed with her death sentence. It wasn't until 2016 when things changed in the state of Florida altogether. The U.S. Supreme Court had just ruled the death penalty was unconstitutional, and Florida revised what would make someone eligible for being sentenced to death. Governor Rick Scott signed off on it being mandatory for a unanimous jury decision for the death sentence, so since the jurors in Emilia's case were 7-5, she was eligible for resentencing. Emilia and another woman on Florida's death row named Tiffany Ann Cole were on a 2020 special together as the youngest women on death row at the time. Tiffany is still awaiting her new sentencing hearing, and as for Emilia, on May 19, 2017, Judge Willard Pope resentenced Emilia to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After Emilia was featured on national television, many thought she looked like a teenager, was pretty, and very articulate. They also couldn't believe she was on death row and didn't feel as if she should still be on death row. Emilia brought up how not too many rich people are on death row and made a statement about equality being an illusion. This made the mother of Heather Strong furious. She felt as if Emilia was becoming a celebrity and did not deserve the attention. She felt that Emilia was just a manipulative killer, and she was quoted saying, "Just like she saw my daughter take her last breath, I want to see her take hers. I can't help that Emilia is only 30. My daughter will never be 30. Women killers go on TV, they cry and all that, but get over it. They are still murderers and no better or worse than male killers. I will be there. God willing, let me live long enough to see that woman die. I'll be the last face I hope she sees." I'm sorry if that sounds cruel, but I don't have any sympathy for her. Heather Strong's mother, Carolyn, believed that Emilia and Joshua only wanted the two children for welfare money, and that they were both evil and did not deserve to be parents or alive. She did not get her wish after Emilia's resentencing, but I would like to ask you all, how do you feel about a killer becoming famous? When they show an interview of the killer, they aren't focusing on their crime, so I think many people can be persuaded by their looks, demeanor, and emotion. Sometimes you have people rooting for the killer because they're focusing on that person 30 years after the crime that they committed, and they seem to not care about their crime in detail. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Also, I would like to note that for some stories I would like to share with you guys, I have to be careful what I say, and in some videos I can't mention certain childhood experiences, so I upload a more detailed version of some stories on Patreon if you are interested. Hello, this is Air, and welcome to the 28th episode of Death Row Executions. I received quite a few requests after my first You Choose segment, and today's story is on Virginia Christian, who was the first female convicted murderer in the state of Virginia to be executed by method of electrocution one day after her 17th birthday. Virginia Christian was born on August 15, 1895 in the state of Virginia. During this time, slavery had just recently been abolished, and a lot of Black Americans during that time were unable to vote, as well as not having an opportunity to serve on juries or be a part of the justice system. The Civil War had also recently ended, and the country as a whole was struggling. There was a Reconstruction period to help rebuild the country, among other things, and laws were passed to help give the many now free African Americans housing, jobs, and education. During the Reconstruction period, the same leaders who helped end slavery also put into place involuntary servitude as a form of punishment for a crime, and many Black Americans were taken advantage of within the criminal justice system. Although slavery was abolished, it did not magically change the sentiments of superiority amongst the racist white Americans, and starting around the year of 1877, the Jim Crow laws emerged. These laws were put into place to reinforce some of the hatred whites had for blacks, so there was now a new era of racial tension and segregation. With that being said, Virginia came from a family of slaves, and she worked as a maid for her master or boss by the name of Ida Belote. She had two parents who were married for 22 years, two older brothers, an older sister, and another sibling who unfortunately passed away as a baby. Virginia's father, Henry Christian, had worked for Ida's parents, and her mother, Charlotte Christian, also worked for the family but was now paralyzed and unable to work. Because of her mother's inability to work or care for the house, Virginia started working at a very young age in order to help her family. Virginia had a rocky relationship with Ida because she was not treated fairly and was often hit. Many family members urged Virginia to stop working for Ida, but she continued working for her up until a couple of days before the murder. On March 16th or 17th, 1912, while Virginia was at work for Ida became irate because she believed Virginia stole a skirt from her. After accusing Virginia to her face, Virginia denied stealing anything and decided to quit and work for a new woman by the name of Mrs. Robinson. Ida told Virginia that if she did not return the skirt within a specific time frame, there would be a punishment, so Virginia decided to just leave and had no intentions on coming back. Ida eventually found the skirt that she accused Virginia of stealing, but she now was having issues caring for her house with 8 kids without Virginia's help, so she decided to travel where Virginia lived and confront her parents. In a sworn affidavit from Henry, he spoke of the day of the murder, which happened on March 18, 1912. My name is Henry Christian. I am the father of Virginia Christian, who has been sentenced to be electrocuted on August 16, 1912. I am 49 years old. I was born in Hampton, Virginia, and have lived here all of my life. I knew Mrs. Belote. her mother, and father before her. I worked for Mrs. Belote for the last 12 years, and she never paid me for some fish I sold her, but she was always disagreeable, so I did not bother about the money, but let it go as she was hard up. I am all broke up about this matter, and sometimes feel like I am about to faint. Virginia was a great help around the house. Her mother had been paralyzed for the last 3 years, and Virginia was all I had to depend on. The only time I can get my mind off of this trouble is when I am at work. Mrs. Belote was always sending for Virginia to work for her, and if she had left her alone, Virginia would be here now. I told Virginia to stay away from Mrs. Belote because Mrs. Belote was crabbed and she would surely get in trouble. I told her to stay away from her and to keep away from Mrs. Belote, but Mrs. Belote and her children were all the time coming after her. The morning Mrs. Belote was killed, she came to my house at about 9 o'clock and asked for Virginia. Mrs. Belote met me out at the gate and asked me if I was Virginia's father, and I told her yes. And she asked me, was Virginia in, and I told her I didn't know. And I said, her mother there is in the house, and I said, if you will go in, you will find her mother in there, and she can tell you where Virginia is. I had been away all the morning, so I went to the front door and let her in, and then she sat down in the corner there by the stove and told my wife that she liked Virginia better than anyone she ever had worked for her since she had been living in Hampton, and she said to my wife, I don't see why in the world Virginia treats me in the way she does. I want her to come and wash my clothes, as I always get along with her, and I don't know what is the matter with Virginia, and I hope she didn't get offended with what I said to her. I didn't put on any water this morning because she didn't come there, and she generally comes a little after 7 o'clock, and now it is 9, and I have not yet seen anything of her today. Then my wife spoke up and said, I guess Virginia has gone down there. And she said she was going down there to your house, and she said, no, I have just come from there, and she was not there. She said she did not put any water on because she didn't have but a little wood, and that she did not want to start a fire and burn the wood before Virginia got there, and she said, I didn't have any help, and I have 8 children, and they didn't give me anything. And then my wife told her, you know, Mrs. Belote, you ought to know that I am paralyzed, and you ought to not keep on after Virginia to come work for you, and she has got plenty of work here to do. So I went on out and left my wife and Mrs. Belote talking. That is all that happened at that time. I did not know anything more about it until 3:30 o'clock or 20 minutes after 4, when we were surrounded here by policemen, and I did not know when they came there what had occurred. The policemen put us all under arrest, but did not take us away. Virginia never gave us any trouble before this, and I believe what she said, that she was trying to defend herself. In a sworn affidavit from Virginia's mother, she stated, my name is Charlotte Christian, and I am the mother of Virginia Christian. As near as I can tell or can come at it, I am 40 years old. I worked for Mrs. Belote when I was a young girl before I was married. I did not know that there was any dispute between Mrs. Belote and Virginia about the skirt until the day that Mrs. Belote came after Virginia, which was the same day that she was killed. I asked Mrs. Belote why she did not come and let me know about the skirt, and she said that after she looked, she found the skirt, but that she had accused Virginia of taking the skirt, and Virginia had told her that she was not going to work for her anymore, and she kept on insisting for Virginia to come to her house, and I made Virginia go. That was the day the trouble happened. After Mrs. Belote left my house in the morning, Mrs. Richardson came for Virginia to work for her by the month. Virginia knew that Mrs. Richardson wanted her to work for her before she went to Mrs. Belote's, and Virginia told Mrs. Richardson that she would be to her house the next morning. Virginia had stopped working for Mrs. Belote because she accused her of stealing a skirt. And last, we have a sworn affidavit from Virginia's aunt. My name is Harriet Christian. I am a sister of Charlotte Christian. Charlotte and me married brothers. The morning this happened, I had started out for the factory to work, and Mrs. Belote's little girl had been here for Virginia and gone back. And I called Virginia at the gate when I was going out, and I said, Virginia, Mrs. Belote has been here after you, and she says, yes. And then I said, what do you keep fooling with Mrs. Belote for? I said, she's never going to give you anything but 25 or 30 cents, and that is nothing for anybody to give you. And I said, your mother wants things, the children want things, and you want things yourself. And I said, if you want to go to work, why don't you get yourself a service place? And she said, Aunt Harriet, that is what I'm going to do, and then I went down to the factory. When Virginia finally made it to Ida's house, Ida became angry with her and started an argument. There are reports that say the argument started over Virginia stealing a locket and a skirt. By the accounts of the sworn affidavits, Ida had already found the skirt that she lost, so the argument could have easily been over Virginia not wanting to work for her anymore. Despite why the argument ensued, it still continued, and Ida hit Virginia with a spittoon. In the next room over, there was a window propped up by 2 broom handles, and they both ran for the window. Virginia was able to grab a handle first and hit Ida on the forehead with it. Ida began to scream hysterically, and in an attempt to muffle her screams, Virginia stuffed a rag in Ida's mouth and left. Ida eventually died from suffocation. Some reports say that when Virginia left, she took Ida's purse, which contained money and a valuable ring. Virginia was soon arrested, and when questioned, she admitted to hitting Ida but was surprised when they told her that Ida was dead. She continued to say that she tried to defend herself, and it was not her intention to kill Ida, but to stop her from screaming, and that she was scared of getting hurt herself. Later, the local newspaper came out with an article dubbing Virginia a murderer and described the scene with Ida laying face down in a pool of blood with her head horribly mutilated and a towel that was stuffed in her mouth and throat. During trial, they tried to assert that Virginia shoved the towel in her throat with a broomstick. After the news of the murder, the community was in uproar and demanded a public hanging. The lynch mobs were abundant in Elizabeth County, Virginia about this case, and during trial, Virginia did not take the witness stand, nor were there any testimonies taken from anyone supporting Virginia. Because of the atmosphere in the community, the only sure thing the jury felt they had to do was sentence Virginia Christian to death by electrocution. She was charged with first-degree murder, meaning that they believed Virginia had planned the murder and that it was premeditated. Ida's only brother, Luther Hobbs, wrote a letter to the governor William Hodges saying that he too wanted a public lynching but has agreed to the decision of Virginia being sent to death by the electric chair and asked him not to commute her sentence. He said that he believed Virginia was most likely waiting in the house for hours waiting for the right opportunity to kill Ida, and first-degree murder was the right conviction. Virginia's mother also wrote a letter to the governor asking for the sentence to be commuted to life in prison. Virginia expressed that the murder was not planned, nor was it intentional, and those in support of Virginia believed second-degree murder, meaning the murder happened in the spur of the moment, would have better fit the crime. The governor declined Virginia's request, and on August 16, 1912, a day after her 17th birthday, Virginia was sent to the electric chair at the state penitentiary in Richmond, Virginia. Henry Christian gave the mortgage of his home in the amount of $250 in order to help Virginia during the trial period, so after her death, the family was left with no money and could not afford to transport Virginia's body from Richmond to Hampton, Virginia. Virginia's body was then handed over to the Virginia State Medical School and used for science. Thank you guys for taking the time to listen and watch this video. Also, please make sure you turn on the post notifications because from now on, I will be premiering most of my videos and watching it live with you, and I would like to be able to communicate with you guys while watching it at the same time.